Hello. This is thrilling to be here. Let's start with the mystery of this title and get some disappointments out of the way. I'm not really going to talk about porn, so you can leave if you're here for that. And I'm also not really going to talk about love in the sense of love making. So I picked this title, A, because I like to provoke, and I like the clicks. And I don't like the comments like, yeah, kind of interesting talk, but crappy title. But I also like analogies. And the analogy that informed this title is porn is usually, oh gosh, I hope I don't have any pornography researchers here, very straightforward physical interaction, right? And love, we assume, is more subtle and ephemeral and intangible, dare I say, sweeter, and abstract. Really hard to understand sometimes what love is. And as I'm sure there are many different forms of porn, they might be a little bit more directly accessible than the concept of love. So this whole thing is trying to relate back to video games as media that have previously been seen as very straightforward, not really tackling anything deep, let alone abstract ideas such as love. So that's that. So who am I? Why am I talking about this? I used to be a media scholar. I have a background in film and literature and a little bit of theater and a little bit of philosophy and this and that. And at the core of all of this is an intense interest for the human experience. Who are we? What makes us tick? What excites us, our dreams and fears and desires. And for some weird reason, I ended up in games, or I landed for now in games, for the last 10 years actually. And I think games are a fascinating medium because so far, they haven't really done a whole lot of that, tackling the human condition in the way that we are used to from books and movies and even graphic novels and animation and all of that. But it's coming, and that's fantastic, and I'm really excited. So I'm here to share my 2 cents about this. I don't know how many of you had the pleasure of meeting the parents of a beloved for the first time and being asked what you do and having to fess up, make video games, and then being confronted with the concerned looks. So I have. It's really, really hard. And I'm trying to do something about the bad rap that video games possess. They are kind of seen as the porn of the video games industry. If you're a baker and you say, I make bread, everybody's like, oh, that's awesome. If you say, I'm a game designer, everybody goes, oh, okay. We heard this morning from Chris Franklin, and I actually watched some of his work on YouTube and really liked it a lot. So part of this is inspired by his contribution to this discourse. Games, traditionally video games, are physical spatial media. I use physical and spatial kind of synonymous. And in a sense, we can view them as glorified obstacle courses. You try to get from A to B, we need some conflict, so let's throw some obstacles in this, some enemies, or whatever form they take. And then you have a goal, and ka-ching, it's all good. So from Super Mario to Doom, kind of the same thing, yet not, but sort of. And it doesn't have to be that way. So 2008, this is not a new discussion at all, but it's great that it's coming up more and more. But in 2008, at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, Clint Hawking, who's one of my absolute heroes, gave a rant, a really angry, F-bombing rant about the state of the games industry and the question around creativity. And I said, it's the most effing creative industry there is. Yet why don't we make games that challenge people? Why isn't Medal of Honor really about honor? Why isn't Call of Duty actually about duty? Why aren't we making games about love and trust and loyalty? Why this object fetishism? Why are we so concerned with cloaks and daggers and ropes and all of that stuff that games are usually made of? It's code, dude. We can't do anything. So why don't we? And he does have a point. Why don't we? I really wanted to. But there is also a really good counterpoint, which is it is very, very hard to understand what trust and love and loyalty and duty and honor actually is about. Because it's intangible, it's abstract. We understand the rules of wood. We do not necessarily understand the rules of love. So when we go with what we know, we model systems that are accessible to us, that we can directly observe, whose rules present themselves to us in a more immediate manner. And it makes it so much easier, even if it's fictional, even if it's imagined worlds, but it's so much easier to model something that is directly observable and accessible in that way. And that leaves games kind of very straightforward, because that's what we tend to model. And that's not unusual. This is my son. He will hate me for this at some point. He's too young to understand yet. He is wearing my shoes, and he finds them extremely interesting because they provide a physical challenge. So between us, for me as well, because they have heels. But for him, this is the best thing ever. He puts them on, and his feet are just the right size to fit in the front part of these shoes. And then he's walking around in this. And it goes to show that until we are 11 years old, at least that's what Piaget, clinical psychologist who study cognitive development, claims, is we are totally anchored in the physical world. This is everything to us. We start abstract reasoning processes when we're about 11. Between 11 and 16, we start to get the hang of the more abstract stuff. Before then, everything is profoundly physical. We need to understand our bodies in space. So games are kind of 11 years old. If we want to reconnect to our playful selves, we do it through physical play. Any form of dance, racquetball, I don't know what you do. But any form of physical play is the most immediate way to reconnect with who we are, with our playful selves, through our bodies. Because that's the first thing we experience, that's the first thing we get. And that builds the foundation for all of our abstract reasoning skills. Our whole conceptual understanding of the world is based on this anchoring in our physical being in the world as people with our bodies. So we understand why up is good, because at some point we managed to get up, and that was fantastic. And then we learned how to walk, and then gravity came along. That was not so fantastic. But that kind of shapes how we view our accomplishments. Yeah, why we talk about an elevated mood or feeling down. These spatial metaphors are very strongly ingrained. They are embodied, and it's important. It's important for how we can make video games that remain physical on one level, but are actually about something else. I read this awesome book by James Geary about I as an other, and it's all about metaphor, but in a very broad sense. And he talks about how our physiological facts shape our beliefs and behaviors. People who were asked to make dots on a line close together, and then were asked about their family relationships, reported to have stronger family bonds than those who were asked to dot the lines further apart. He said, nah, not that close to my family. Isn't that totally weird? It's totally weird how priming us through these physical facts to think about our emotional truth differently. Also, when you do something great, like when you do sports and you accomplish something, wow, this is a very intuitive gesture. People do this. Look at videos of athletes. They cross the finish line. They go, wow. People who are blind, who have never seen anybody else do that, do the same thing. They go, wow. Because our bodies lend expression to what is happening inside. That's really fascinating and is relevant, I promise. So, coming back to video games, if you're wondering. It's embodied play. We project ourselves into these physical spaces. We project ourselves with our imagined bodies, whether we have an avatar or not. We're there. We learn through the consequences to our actions. This is embodied learning. This is embodied play, in a way. And video games can scratch an itch we might not be able to locate. They can fulfill a psychological desire through enacting certain physical, pseudo-physical things in this virtual space. They allow us to manage our phantom pain. What? Okay, so think about the games you play at certain times in your lives. I have this theory, and I do not have any data, so sue me. But you might want to do a little bit of self-observation here. What kinds of games you're drawn to and why. I have a friend who is supremely drawn to tower defense games. And it's because, and I know him very well, he is very methodical, he plans ahead, he structures everything, he's a strategist. And by playing tower defense games, he's enacting just that. He's taking precautions for the onslaught of chaos. It is a way of feeling empowered. It is kind of a symbolical rain dance, as Janet Murray called Tetris. She got a lot of heat for that, so I can get a lot of heat for this. That's cool. This is called conceptual synthesia. We understand one thing in terms of another in this way, the physical enactment of the video game and the inner enactment of that conflict. Or shooters, who also have a very, very bad reputation. And I don't really want to get into this discussion. But what is amazing about playing a shooter is, not just, yeah, everybody talks about agency, but this really, really targeted, focused action with an immediate impact. How often do we have that in life? How often are we faced with chaos and a sucky interface and no reward whatsoever? It's really great to be able to say this and take aim and do it. I'm not talking about shooting people here, not even in video games, but just the action of targeted action is quite powerful, and it feels empowering. Or Candy Crush. It's nothing to do with candy, but it has everything to do with synergies, and also keeping chaos under control. This pattern. We know it, we call this pattern matching games. None of this is really new. But it feels empowering, it feels good. We do this for a reason. Our brains crave this kind of engagement for a reason. So it's all already there. Games offer tangible conflicts to enact intangible ones. That's the thesis. Now, very often they're not really designed for this, not consciously. And how can we do that? Knowing this or doing this with designing with an awareness that we are providing these kinds of opportunities for players, how could we approach it? How could we lend more depth to these physical embodied experiences? So I'm saying physicality in games, their straightforwardness in a way is a strength. It's not a problem, it's a potential, but how do we use it purposefully? How do we use it deliberately, intentionally? So I wrote a little book. It's really expensive, I'm very sorry. I didn't set the price. And it sums up about 10 years of research. How can we leverage the physical potential of games to make abstract ideas tangible? How can we make games that teach us something about others and ourselves by using metaphors, mostly? Because they are the concrete, tangible surface to something underneath that is intangible and abstract. So I'm sharing with you a little bit of a meandering hodgepodge that I tried to structure along these 5 perspectives on deep game design. Oh, yeah, deep game design, right? As if this is a thing. I call these games deep games because there's something on the surface and then there's something underneath, so that's that, mystery revealed. So the first thing you're going to learn is that you need to become a mind reader. Yeah, totally serious, you will know why. That metaphors should be with you at all times, not just on the 4th of May. You should use the body to impact the mind and physical play if you want to explore what you could do with games that's not just straightforward. Look at allegorical games and how to create meaningful experiences with them. And maybe reduce structure for the sake of more emotion. Here, so become a mind reader, at least of your own mind. That's not too bad, right? It's not too esoteric. You cannot model something you don't understand. How are you going to make a game about the human condition if you don't even know your own? So I tell my students who voluntarily take a course called Making Deep Games, and then at least claim that they liked it, that they have to become mind readers, and they should write morning pages. So 3 pages of longhand every morning after waking up. And I say, oh, I can't think in the mornings. Yes, awesome. That's why you do it in the morning. So your inner critic is shutting its mouth. And you tune in to your inner channel. Of course, I didn't invent that. That's from Julia Cameron's work, The Artist's Way. It's really great. You should read it. And then you go on an artist date. Doesn't mean you're dating an artist. It means you date your inner artist, yes? And you do something that is pure play for you. You don't go to the museum because it's educational. You go to the flea market because it's full of obscure treasures and, interesting relics from dead aunts and stuff. So I'm kind of morbid. So anyway, so you do that, what feels like play to you, because you need something to fill the well, and then you write about it, and then themes will start to emerge. And then this is where the third tool comes in, the dialogue with your inner game designer. That's a very mysterious being. It's really smart, and it's good to tap into, because the inner game designer understands the structural elements of games and how to use them to make sense of salient aspects of the human experience. Like, what's your goal? What's your conflict? Why can't you get it? What would be a win state? What would be a lose state? And it's also very systemic. So it's a very, very interesting way of looking at life. So you're not just stuck in a mood. You can look at things from different angles, change stuff around, regain some agency. And that can be a starting point for a very personal game, maybe, that is about more than just blowing shit up. And that's where metaphors come into play as well. So here, definition, because you have to do that, right? So the essence of metaphor is understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another. I do this with my students too, so forgive me. Life is a highway, we all know that. Yes, if you want to sing, that's fine. I'm not. So what comes to mind when we hear that? What are the different things that constitute the highway metaphor? Right? You have an exit, maybe, at some point, because there is a new opportunity. Or there's an accident, which could be a tragedy in life. Or you're speeding, which means you're partying really hard. Or maybe there's a traffic jam, nothing's moving. So there are all of these different dimensions to it. So thinking about procedural metaphors, the structural metaphors, can be very, very productive as a way to translate that into game design. How? I'm going to show you something very weird. This is a game about eating disorder. And it's part of a bigger project that we called For the Records that I did at DePaul University with my colleague Anuradha Rana. She's a documentary filmmaker, and I'm the game designer. And we had a group of students both from film and from games, and we made 4 small projects about 4 different mental illnesses. So there was attention deficit disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder, and eating disorder, because they're quite common amongst young people, and we were working with people who had first-hand experience, and they were part of our teams. So to illustrate what I mean, this is very, very scary. I'm live playing this. Fingers crossed.
Your garden is your solace, its serenity your protection. But it is overgrown with weeds and infested by slugs, signs of weakness. Can you bring out the beauty? Can you make it perfect?
So I have all of these slugs here, and I can scrub over them with my mouse pad, and then they disappear. and I can water my plant. Look at this. Then I have more slugs. So the slugs are unwanted emotion that come up through eating, because eating disorder is not really about food, I've been told. It's more about that need to not have any needs because they couldn't be met, and that's scary. There are also these weeds that I can rip out.
Your discipline is paying off. Keep going easy on the water. You don't want the weeds and slugs to take over, do you? Stay strong to come closer to serenity, to perfection.
That male voice is the eating disorder voice that edges you on towards perfection. And your garden gets more and more abstract.
You're not thinking of giving up now, are you? Don't get weak or your garden will never be perfect. Just a pathetic slug and weed-infested piece of dirt.
Kind of harsh. Well, it is. So, almost there, almost perfect. Doesn't really look all too healthy, but I mean, the weeds are gone, almost. I'm speeding this up a little.
Finally, it is quiet. No more noise, no more chaos. Stillness. Forever.
So now we have
reached perfection.
Yeah, thank you. Now we have a very abstracted end screen. Doesn't look all too accomplishy. So this is not really the win state you might have thought it would be. It's deliberately seducing the player to go towards a path or down a path that is not productive, to buy into that fantasy, that illusion that the weeds and the slugs need to go, that there's just no place for them, and it needs to be sterile and perfect. And this back to life actually used to be a gravestone in one of our early iterations, because that is a realistic outcome if eating disorder is not managed. And the person we worked with to design this, she is a dancer recovering from eating disorder, and she gave feedback throughout the whole process, and she said, well, no, that's too harsh, that's not what happens. And I said, well, okay, I'm going to change it. If you say I should change this, I'm trying to do right by you. And then the next day she emails me and she says, you know what, this hit me so hard, because that was so true. And I'm in recovery, and I still didn't want to admit that I could die from this. So we changed it to back to life, so it's not quite as harsh, but it's, I think, clear what it means. So now we have a new element. This is the hunger meter, the saturation meter, because if you have eating disorder, you lose all hunger cues, the natural connection to your body. So I have to water my garden. I'm trying to stay in this green spot here with my saturation meter. And oh my gosh, the weeds are coming back. And all the slugs. And now it's really boring, because all I do is watch that stupid meter, but that's also kind of how the recovery process works, is you eat by the clock, whether you feel like it or not, and then just endure what it might bring. Oh, look, the weeds are blooming now. They're blooming. The voice broke. So harsh eating disorder voice tells you to not do the stupid thing. And then there's the voice of health that talks back to you and says, no, but I need it. I think it just broke. Okay, that is that. So you can make your way to the other end of this game, shrinking the box, shrinking your eating disorder back down again, until you reach another ending, which is the imperfection ending that embraces the slugs and the weeds as an ideal representation. Okay. There is also, because metaphorical games are terribly cryptic sometimes, there is even a what everything means explanation for people who want a more in-depth discourse around that. Great tool related to this, if anybody is interested in making metaphorical games, is Metaphors in Mind. It's actually a book written by two psychologists, James Lawley and Penny Tompkins. And it is a very, very similar process to that metaphorical game design process, where you are asked to model your inner landscape. And they use a process called clean language with their clients, where they are just reflecting back what they had said to not taint the inner landscape that is being constructed by the client, and that will shed light on What is happening here? What is the space? Who is it inhabited by? What are its rules? What are its boundaries? What are its dangers and what are its potentials? And then they slowly transform that space in therapy to transform, the inner landscape. Okay, no, we're not going to do that. Perspective 3, using the body to impact the mind. Here is one of my big frustrations with motion-based games. And I know they're a little bit passé, maybe, but I'm still frustrated because I'm old and angry. But there is now VR, so maybe there is another opportunity to revisit this. There is this holy grail of immediacy, of presence in games. You have to be there in the midst of the action and feel it all. And so we use platforms. Chris talked about this as well. Where is he? We use these platforms and kind of let them guide what we make for them. And when the Wii came out, it was all about, okay, now what can we do with this? Or the Kinect, what can we do with this using our whole bodies? But the fictions of the games didn't quite change. So I found myself turning doorknobs. Like, what a great interaction is that? Didn't enrich my gameplay experience one bit. So how could we use that room that has now become available on the screen for something that actually reinforces my physical action in a it informs it in a very different way, that opens that two-way street of the mind-body connection. Because when you think about it, what is it really about when you lift weights? Yeah, of course, muscles and stuff, then being sore for a day. But it is also about that feeling that you are capable of lifting the burden. You can handle the burden. There is something symbolical about that. Or dance. If dancers just went through the physical movements, nobody would watch it. It would look like puppets. It is an expression of something from within. Or yoga. If you have ever been to a yoga class, they tell you all sorts of stuff, what you should imagine. And it's great. It can be very, very empowering. If a good director would never tell an actor to just go like this, right? You try to create a sense of who is that character. And I'm really fascinated by Michael Chekhov, who is a Russian-American director and theater practitioner who invented the tool of psychological gestures. You find that one gesture that defines the essence of a character. And it's one gesture. And by enacting it, you are evoking all the nuances of that character. There's great potential to use that in any kind of digital game setting that also has a whole body interaction. It is more than what meets the eye. It's not just about the body moving in a certain way. It's about activating the inner resources, what happens within. Kelly Santiago said that a while ago, exploring one's body equates exploring one's psyche. But here's the thing. Motion control works well in drawing attention to the action in the physical world in front of the screen, whereas most hardcore games are about the fictional world inside the screen. But now if you're trying to mimic on screen what happens in the real world, we have a tautology, we have a dead corpse. We have something that is exactly the same, there is no added value. Now what do we do on screen? Here's a little experiment. This is called zombie yoga. It's a student game, it's a Kinect game. And you do yoga to fight zombies. The zombies are your inner fears. The yoga is very bad. It doesn't matter. And you direct this light ball around. Everything here is highly symbolic or metaphorical. That's me. And it's your inner light that you're directing. And we chose poses that are strong or that balance you to really tap into that. And then we use the screen to reinforce that feeling, to really open that two-way street between mind and body. Towards the end, you get this supercharged light ball and hordes of zombies, and it feels really awesome. And you can recover your inner child. Who doesn't want that? Okay. So, that's that. Food for thought on the physical part. Perspective 4, potentials of allegorical games. So I talked about metaphors, but structural metaphors, procedural metaphors, more the systemic part of this. But then a lot of games, as Chris said this morning, are spatial in the sense that they tell us a story through space. And we could make this less straightforward as well, through allegories. That's been done, but I don't know, is there enough attention on it? I don't know, so hopefully soon. What is an allegory? It's a story that has a deeper or more general meaning in addition to its surface meaning. So again, something underneath. There are 4 good reasons, probably more, 4 good reasons to use allegory in deep game design. Silent Hill 2, such a good game, I'm still so scared. It makes inner processes tangible. On the surface level, you're this schmuck who is in this town looking for his dead wife. What a crazy story. And you're finding all of these clues, and you're meeting all of these monsters, and it's terribly rapey, the whole thing. And on the surface level, it's just a horror game. But then underneath, it's a psychotherapeutic process where somebody comes to terms with having killed his wife. Spoiler, but you can't spoil Shakespeare either. So if you haven't played it by now, it's your fault. What would this look like if it were a literal game? Yeah, 15 hours of sitting in a therapist's office being asked questions. How boring. Allegories, they open a magic door through the mundane to the magical, right? So what it is on the surface might not be all that intriguing, but what it is really about is intriguing. And sometimes we do not want to engage in complicated, difficult topics. Sometimes we need a little bit of magical hand-holding and fairy dust to allow ourselves to open up to these themes. Papa and EO from Minority Media, Minority Media is really, they're my heroes, they're fantastic. Papa EO is about a conflict between a boy and his alcoholic father. You don't sit down and say, yeah, what are we going to do for evening entertainment? Yeah, alcoholism, yeah, surviving abuse, bring it. But you look at this, and you're enchanted by the world. You're enchanted by the characters. You're just drawn into the mystery of this. And so it becomes more and more of what it is about at some point. But what draws you in is that atmosphere and that world and those characters. Spirits of Spring, also Minority Media. Bullying, yeah, let's play a game about feeling really, really terrible because we're being bullied. Let's play a game where you are the guardian of spring and you have friends and you are collecting these spring spirit powers and you're building bridges and you're guarding the sunshine. Yeah, that sounds more like it. And oh yeah, there are these evil crows. We're going to kick their butt. Or maybe not. We're being bullied. Oh, so this is about bullying. But now I'm invested in the characters. So that's a good trick. Also, allegorical games allow you to focus on the theme and nothing but the theme. Again, imagine a bullying game. It's not really about the lunch money, right? So if you make a bullying game in a literal setting, what are you going to do? What is this about? You're organizing a nerd convention, and then you're being bullied by the jocks, and you have to give them the lunch money. There's 1,000 million things that could distract you from that. But if you make an allegorical game, every single detail of it can speak to that theme. The guardian of spring, Chivatin, the little native boy, the guardian of spring. Translated to the real life, that means he's the guardian of emotional well-being of his friends. He brings sunshine and playfulness. He makes sure everybody's okay. And then they're being bullied, and the crows bring winter. So yeah, it's not about the lunch money, it's about making everybody psychologically miserable. Making it cold and disconnecting people. So Chivatin loses his string of spirit powers, which he needs to build bridges across the water and solve puzzles. By losing that ability, he's losing the ability to connect. It's such a great metaphorical mechanic that reinforces that theme. How do you do that when you remain on the literal level? But if you translate it into an allegory and everything can speak to that point, it's amazing how many layers of meaning you can suddenly build into that. Allegories make you think. Also, I have this thing about the brain lately. I really want to study neuroscience. If somebody takes a 41-year-old student, I'm in. Allegories make you think. They do not give away easily what they are about. So you really have to work for it. And that's great. As gamers, we like that. We like working for it to a degree. And this here, it's kind of it's a puzzle. And they can make you think in several ways, I found. As a mystery, as a message, and allegories can also act as a muse. So in Silent Hill, metaphor is a mystery. You don't necessarily have to solve it. You can still have a really exciting experience doing it. There is something underneath, and it's all coherent. It comes together at some point if you put in the work. But it's just there to dangle the carrot in front of your nose. And it's like, there's another hint. There's another diary entry. There's another snippet of information. You piece it all together and just creates that breadcrumb. In Papa and Yo, it's really a metaphor as message. The designer wanted to make sure it is understood that you cannot save your alcoholic relative. You have to move on at some point. It was very, very important that this came across. Metaphor acted as the way to draw people in, but then it was very clearly revealed what it was about. And then this is the most, like the unicorn of allegorical games, I feel. Metaphor is muse, where it doesn't necessarily all have a very clear meaning. Not every element has to be, you have to be able to put your finger on and make these exact correspondences between this and that. It is about what it means to the player. So every element is designed as a projection screen for the player. And it's a really, really elusive thing to do, I feel. And in Journey, it evokes those questions. What is my journey? Who are my companions? What do the symbols mean to me? What tribe am I a part of? What's my destination? What awaits me there? And that's why it can get so deep into the core and shake us. So how do we apply this? Just a little bit. I actually apologize I put this in here. I think the hero's journey is a good starting point, but I'm not suggesting this is the only or the best way to do this. But if we want to translate any of this into action and start designing at some point, it is a fair starting point, because it is an allegory in itself. Everything on the hero's journey is about transformation. So takeaways for designing metaphors mystery. Must have a clear vision of the source system, obviously. Must create accurate mappings between all the elements. So it could potentially all be unlocked once you have the key. Mystery is not the same thing as bullshitting, yeah? It's not mysterious if just some random stuff is happening. It still needs to be informed by a certain logic that people could possibly get. And you have to mind the curiosity gap. If it's too big, people are just lost. If it's too small, it's boring. And if you playtest, you gotta look for whether the mystery happens by way of checking for the ability to hypothesize, formulate what this might be about. Are people doing that? Then you might be on the right track. So metaphor is message. For games with a communicative agenda, I want to say something. You gotta make sure players get it, otherwise you're losing your communicative goal. So you have either a speaking title, which I think is cheating. But yeah, perfection, right? You have non-metaphorical cutscenes, that's another way. So Papa and Yo had that, where they suddenly became very, very literal about what happened and what the relationship between the boy and the monster is really about. Or contextual materials. All of Minority Media's, the two that came out along those veins, they have a promo video that is live action. So real actors, real situations, very literal. It's very clear this is about bullying, this is about alcoholism. And keeping the metaphors very close to the source. So it is not a big stretch from being addicted to the frogs to being addicted to alcohol. It's really, really easy to decode, but it gives that nice surface. And obscure metaphors for this type of game doesn't make for clever games, it makes for confused players. And if you have a message, you might, you test for whether people get it. And then here, I'm kind of lost, but here's what I think. Metaphor is muse. Element by element specific interpretation. Not necessary, that's the good news. But here is where it gets really, really hard. How can you focus on this emotional resonance and evocative potential, have design elements that really speak to people, to our shared collective unconscious and the archetypes and all of that stuff that we brought with us when we emerged from the Ursuppe. Is that a word? Do you understand that? How do game elements prompt these associations? And then test for how does the game and its elements make the player feel? What associations are evoked by imagery and personal resonance? I actually do want to stop here because I would like to leave some room for questions and discussion. And I don't have a nice question slide, but just trust me on that. I'm taking questions now. Thanks. Microphones are here.
Hi, so you talked a lot about certain games that addressed like mental illnesses and stuff. Are you seeing a push for more games like that, like as time goes on, or are you seeing that there isn't a push and that by having conferences like this that you should be wanting to inspire people to go for those?
Well, I'm totally biased on that because since one of my big interests is in using metaphors to shed light on inner processes and mental health issues are just really tangible in that way, I'm seeing these games all over the place. There's definitely like a good bunch of them out there already. So I think they happen more and more, but I also think that through having conferences like this, more and more people might have the idea or be inspired to make them. So it's kind of a self-reinforcing thing. And it isn't necessarily, I'm not advocating for let's all make mental health games. I'm just saying, let's make games that challenge us and that move us profoundly and that has something to do with the human experience and how we take and what we desire and fear and dream of. Am I done? Was that it? Are there more questions?
Hi, you had this part where you said that mystery is not equals bullshitting. I was wondering, do you mean that when questions are left unanswered? Because for me, I'm a person who despises when there is something that is left blank and unanswered. Like, I can understand that it might leave some space open for the interpretation, but for me, I would rather prefer to have some kind of answer rather than left this gap open.
Mm-hmm. So, good question. So I think the metaphor is mystery doesn't necessarily need to reveal everything, but everything that is given in terms of clues need to make sense towards an intended reading. That doesn't mean it cannot be interpreted in different ways. It doesn't mean it shouldn't encourage different readings and interpretations. I mean, look at the forum post of Braid. What people speculate is fascinating, and it's awesome. It's great that it allows for that. But if the author didn't have one thing in mind, at least, there wouldn't be a coherent reading possible. And I know I'm getting a lot of flack for that, because the counterpoints to say, no, it is all in the audience and whatnot. But I'm a little bit more with you. I like it if there is something behind it that I could potentially reveal and I can feel smart by doing so, but I don't necessarily need to have everything laid out or need to have all of the answers given. It's just there shouldn't be something that clearly is just there for the game's sake, you know? And everything, I think, should have a purpose in the game that speaks to the message.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, good? We good? Are you gonna make some games now? Okay, thank you.